Sophia had learned long ago that in a world dominated by men, especially in the military, a woman had to fight twice as hard for half the recognition. The barracks echoed with crude laughter the first time she shouldered the long sniper rifle during training. They called her Sniper Queen, not out of respect, but as a joke, a mocking nickname meant to remind her she was out of place. The men whispered that her arms were too thin, her patience too fragile, her nerves too soft for the merciless precision demanded by a sniper. She never fired back at their words, never snapped, because deep inside she knew that only steel-cold proof on the battlefield could silence doubt. But the sting remained, and when she lay awake at night with the rifle resting against her bunk, she whispered silently to herself that one day they would all see. One day the same voices that mocked would fall silent, not from discipline or command but from awe. Her journey had not been an accident. From childhood she had possessed eyes sharper than most. Her father had been a hunter in the mountains, and she had grown up watching him disappear into forests, returning with prey felled from distances that seemed impossible. At first he never let her near the rifle, claiming the recoil would shatter her shoulder. But persistence broke him down. By 14 she was breathing steadily through the scope, learning how the forest air shifted bullets mid-flight, how heat waves bent the world, and how patience could outlast the beating heart. By 16 she was out shooting her father. The military had seemed the natural path, though she quickly discovered that her skill with a rifle was not enough to win over hardened men who had fought in deserts and cities, who had bled and carried scars. They treated her as an intruder until they discovered her accuracy. Even then the respect was laced with doubt. Every miss, every adjustment became proof to them that she was lucky, not skilled. That nickname clung to her like a parasite, Sniper Queen, said with smirks instead of salute. It all came to a boiling point during deployment in the northern ranges, where insurgent forces had dug into the mountains with clever brutality. The terrain was merciless, sharp cliffs, thin air, freezing winds that gnawed through bone. The unit had been stationed at an outpost that looked more like a pile of stones than a fort, tasked with cutting supply lines to enemy strongholds hidden across valleys. Intelligence reported a convoy of high-value targets, commanders responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 provinces. The order was simple: intercept at all costs. The reality was chaos. The convoy's route was shielded by ridges, making approach impossible without detection. Traditional ambush failed because of overwatch sentries. The enemy was confident in their position, believing no shot could reach them from beyond the valley. That was when her commanding officer, a man who had never fully hidden his doubts about her, muttered the challenge that would change everything. Unless our Sniper Queen can reach them from 3 clicks away, we've got nothing. The squad chuckled, thinking it was a joke, but Sophia's eyes locked on the map, and a calm fire burned behind them. She spent the next 12 hours preparing, alone. The location was not forgiving. A ridge 3,000 meters away offered the only line of sight, but it was battered by crosswinds and offered no cover beyond jagged rocks. She studied wind charts, measured elevation shifts, and calculated ballistic drop until numbers swirled in her mind like storm clouds. Her rifle, a custom long-range bolt-action with a heavy barrel, had never been tested beyond 2,000 meters in combat. Every calculation she scribbled in her worn notebook felt like writing her own fate. Sleep never came that night. Instead, she lay beneath the stars, listening to the hollow silence of the mountains and feeling the cold steel of her rifle as if it were part of her body. At dawn she crawled into position. The valley yawned below, a brutal stretch of stone and shadow. The convoy appeared on schedule, trucks grinding along the dirt path, engines coughing against the climb. She breathed in deeply, forcing her heart to slow, her body melting into the rocks until she became part of the landscape. Through the scope, the enemy appeared almost unreal, silhouettes shimmering in the distance. 3,000 meters was a number most snipers considered impossible in live combat, a feat reserved for training legends or lucky shots recorded in history. She adjusted for wind, checked her scope's 0, then waited. Minutes stretched into eternities. She ignored the ache in her elbows, the numbness spreading through her legs, the biting cold that gnawed through her gloves. All that existed was the crosshair and the faint figure of the lead commander stepping from his vehicle, pointing at something on the ridge as though mocking the very possibility of threat. Sophia's finger rested gently on the trigger, her breath held until her chest stilled like a lake at dawn. The math had been done, the wind accounted for, the bullet's arc predicted like a prophecy written in air. But there was still the unspoken law of sniping, that beyond all skill the shot required the soul to believe it would strike. She whispered to herself, not words of prayer but of promise, "You will see." And with a slow, deliberate squeeze, the rifle thundered. The recoil slammed her shoulder, echoing through the mountains like the roar of judgment. She never blinked, watching through the scope as the bullet began its journey, a speck of death carving through 3 kilometers of shifting air and unforgiving distance. Time itself seemed to bend, seconds stretching into eternity as the round arced across the valley. Then, as if the mountains themselves held their breath, the enemy commander's head snapped back in an explosion of crimson mist, his body collapsing like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The valley erupted into chaos. Shouts, screams, soldiers scrambling for cover as panic devoured discipline. The convoy halted, confusion spreading like wildfire. Her unit, watching through binoculars from the opposite ridge, fell into stunned silence. The men who once mocked her, who smirked every time they called her Sniper Queen, could only stare in disbelief. Radios crackled with frantic voices, confirmed hit at 3,000 meters. The words carried both awe and terror. For Sophia, there was no triumphal smile, no shout of victory. She simply adjusted the bolt, chambered another round and whispered into the biting wind, "This is only the beginning." The silence that fell over the unit after the shot was unlike anything Sophia had ever felt. It wasn't the silence of respect yet, not exactly, it was the silence of disbelief, the kind that weighed heavy in the air because no one could find words to fill it. Men who had spent their lives claiming they had seen everything stood frozen, binoculars still pressed to their faces, jaws clenched but slack. The radio repeated the confirmation, but the echo of her rifle's thunder was louder in their minds. They had mocked, they had doubted, and now their doubt had been shattered by a bullet that crossed an impossible distance. And still Sophia was not done. Through her scope she tracked the convoy's chaos. Men running in every direction, some fumbling for cover behind trucks, others aiming wildly at the ridges around them, firing into empty stone. Adjusted, breathing calm, her world reduced to mathematics and patience. The bolt slid, another round ready. 3,000 meters away, another silhouette dropped in the dust, felled before he even realized he had been marked. The convoy was no longer a force. It was prey. Her squad leader finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse over the comms. "Holy Sophia, keep firing. Take them apart." No one called her Sniper Queen this time. They didn't dare. She obeyed, but not like a soldier following orders, she obeyed like a hunter already deep in the rhythm of the hunt. Each shot was methodical, the pause between trigger pulls as steady as a heartbeat. The air around her smelled faintly of gunpowder and cold stone, her cheek pressed tight against the stock. One by one, targets fell. Gunners who tried to man the heavy weapons on the trucks, officers who shouted commands, even a driver who thought racing away would save him. Every hit spread further panic, the convoy unraveling into a storm of fear. From the opposite ridge, her unit watched in stunned awe, their own rifles silent, because nothing they carried could even reach the distance she was working at. She was alone in this fight, yet at the same time carrying the weight of the entire squad's survival on her trigger finger. But long shots like this carried dangers beyond missing. Sophia knew the enemy wasn't stupid. With each man that dropped, they began to understand. They scanned the ridges with binoculars, desperate to find the ghost that haunted them from beyond reach. One of the insurgents pointed, shouting something, and within seconds mortars were being wheeled into position. Her pulse quickened. The first shell arced upward, vanishing against the pale sky before slamming into the ridge 200 meters short of her position, a geyser of stone exploding into the air. Rocks clattered around her body, dust choking her lungs. For the first time since squeezing the trigger, Sophia blinked. Mortars were not rifles. There was no forgiveness in their radius, no cover strong enough to withstand a direct hit. She rolled into a new position, dragging her rifle across the jagged surface, careful not to expose her silhouette against the skyline. Another shot boomed from her rifle, striking the insurgent who had manned the mortar site. His body collapsed over the weapon, but others rushed to replace him. The game had shifted. She wasn't just taking them apart, now she was buying time. Her squad finally came alive, voices barking in the comms as they prepared a flanking maneuver. They would use the chaos she had created to move in to finish the job on the ground. Sophia held them distracted. Keep their eyes on you. The order was clear, and though it meant staying exposed, she didn't argue. She shifted, adjusted, and fired again. A truck exploded as her round hit its engine, flames licking upward as men scattered like ants from the blast. Mortar shells kept pounding the mountain closer each time, shattering rock into deadly shards. Dust blinded her scope, grit burned her eyes, but she never left her position. Every trigger pull was not just an attack, it was survival for her squad moving in. She imagined them darting through the gullies, creeping along the shadows of cliffs, drawing closer with each heartbeat. And she knew that if she missed even once, the enemy would regain their courage and spot the approaching soldiers. There was no room for error. The hours dragged, though in her scope it all blurred into moments. Her shoulder ached from recoil, her knuckles bled from jagged stone cutting into her skin, but she kept firing. The mountain itself seemed determined to break her, the thin air making every breath a fight, the icy wind stabbing at her bones. Yet the rhythm never faltered. Every shot was deliberate, every movement economical. The world outside her scope ceased to exist. She was no longer Sophia, the mocked sniper queen. She was the rifle, the crosshair, the invisible hand of judgment reaching across impossible distance. When her squad finally announced they had reached the convoy and were engaging in close quarters, she allowed herself one single long exhale. Relief tasted strange, mixed with the metallic tang of blood from her bitten lip. She had done it. She had dragged the enemy into panic, broken their lines, and given her unit the window they needed. Still she did not rise. Even as gunfire echoed from the valley floor, even as screams rose and trucks burned, she stayed prone, scope sweeping the chaos below. She picked off stragglers, enemies who tried to regroup, sharpshooters who sought high ground. Her rifle cracked like thunder across the valley, every echo followed by silence. Finally, the comms filled with the sound of victory, convoy neutralized. All targets down. Outpost secure. There was cheering, but she did not smile. She allowed herself only the smallest nod, lowering the rifle, her cheek raw from pressing into the stock for so long. She closed her eyes briefly, but even in darkness she saw the valley, the arc of the bullet, the moment the commander's body fell. That image would never leave her, just as the whispers of doubt from her unit never had. But now the whispers would change. She had rewritten them with lead and fire. And when she finally stood, brushing the dust and blood from her uniform, she felt the weight of silence again. But this time it was not disbelief. It was reverence. The men who had laughed at her, mocked her title, now watched her as though she had walked out of legend. They didn't dare speak because words seemed too small for what they had witnessed. The mocking nickname Sniper Queen no longer sounded like a joke. In their eyes, it was a crown, and it had been earned at 3,000 meters. The return to the outpost was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Soldiers who had been loud and cocky days before now kept their voices low when Sophia walked past. Some clapped her on the shoulder without words, some offered brief nods, but most simply stared, as if afraid that speaking might break the spell of what they had witnessed. She didn't crave their praise. In truth, she found it uncomfortable. Respect felt heavier than mockery, because respect carried expectations, and she knew the next time her rifle cracked across a valley, they would demand the same miracle. The truth was she had been lucky. 3,000 meters was beyond the edge of reason. Ballistics could predict, wind could be measured, angles calculated, but at that distance fate itself played a hand. She lay awake that night thinking of it, the bullet arcing across the air, the perfect collision of math and instinct. She wondered if she could do it again. And beneath that thought, something darker lurked. What if she couldn't? Soldiers lived and died by reputation, and reputations could be destroyed with a single miss. Days passed, but the battle had carved itself into the mountains. The valley below was littered with burnt trucks and shattered weapons, a graveyard that buzzed with flies. The insurgent network in the region had been crippled, but not broken. Scouts reported regrouping forces further north, bolstered by reinforcements from across the border. Retaliation was inevitable. Sophia's unit prepared, digging into positions, reinforcing defenses, and rationing supplies for what promised to be a long siege. Every man kept glancing at her rifle, as if it alone could hold back the tide. The nickname that had once been mocking now carried a weight of expectation she hadn't asked for. She felt it in their eyes, hope and desperation tangled together. It was as if her single shot had turned her into something larger than human, a weapon in flesh and bone. And yet, inside, she remained the same girl who had whispered into the cold mountain air, promising herself she would prove them wrong. The retaliation came sooner than expected. At dawn, a roar shook the valley as enemy mortars began to rain fire on the outpost. The ground shuddered, walls of sandbags collapsed, and men dove for cover as dirt and flame exploded around them. Sophia pressed against the earth, rifle cradled to her chest, waiting for the barrage to ease. When it did, waves of insurgents surged through the valley, hundreds of them, rifles flashing, voices raised in bloodthirsty chants. The outpost erupted in defense, machine guns chattering, rockets streaking across the sky. Smoke swallowed the mountains. Through it all, Sophia crawled to the high ridge overlooking the chaos, dragging her rifle behind her. Her fingers were steady, her eyes unblinking, but inside her chest the storm raged. There were too many. She could not shoot them all. No one could. But still she had to try. Her scope became the eye of the battle. She picked off squad leaders first, the ones waving their arms and shouting commands. Each kill threw the enemy into disarray, slowing their momentum. She shifted targets quickly, never lingering, always seeking the figure who held the group together. Her shots were not miracles like the 3,000-meter hit. Most were within 1,000, brutal and efficient. But to her unit, each crack of her rifle was salvation. Sniper Queens got them pinned, a soldier shouted over the radio, his voice trembling with relief. The title no longer stung her ears. It was not mockery now. It was identity forged in the fire of combat. Hours stretched into a blur of blood and smoke. The attack did not break, waves kept coming, and the outpost bled. Sophia lost count of how many men she dropped through her scope, her world narrowed to crosshairs and targets. But fatigue was merciless. Her hands trembled between shots, her eyes burned, her cheek felt bruised raw against the stock. Her water ran dry, but she dared not move for fear of missing the next shot. At one point, the enemy nearly overran the walls, and she shifted to cover her squad mates at close range, dropping men less than 200 meters away, her rifle roaring like a drumbeat. Each kill was survival, not glory. The battlefield stank of blood and smoke, the cries of the wounded rising like a song of despair. She fought through it all, her rifle the only constant, until finally the last wave broke against the defenses and silence returned, broken only by groans and the crackle of burning wreckage. When it was over, Sophia staggered back into the outpost, her body coated in dust and blood, her rifle heavy as lead. The men looked at her as though she had walked out of myth, their faces hollow with exhaustion but lit with something like reverence. "We'd all be dead without you," one soldier whispered, and though she said nothing, his words struck deep. She did not feel like a savior. She felt like a ghost, her soul scattered with every bullet she had fired. The unit had survived, but at what cost? Dozens of her comrades lay dead or dying, and the air smelled of loss more than victory. Her shot at 3,000 meters had silenced their mockery, but this battle had carved her into something colder. They no longer saw Sophia as a soldier among them. They saw her as a weapon, necessary, terrifying, untouchable. That night, she sat alone on the ridge, the stars cold and merciless above. She cleaned her rifle with hands that trembled more than she admitted. Every part of her body ached, every bone screamed for rest, but her mind would not quiet. She thought of her father's lessons, of the patience he had taught her in the forest, of the simple clarity of hunting. But this was not hunting. This was slaughter, endless and heavy, staining her soul with each shot. She wondered how many more battles she could endure before the rifle consumed her entirely. And yet, deep inside she knew the truth: she could not stop. The nickname, the crown, the legend they had thrust upon her, it was now a chain. She was the Sniper Queen, and they would expect her to wear that crown every time the mountains demanded blood. The days after the siege were filled with a strange tension that hung heavy in the outpost air. Victory had been theirs, but it was a hollow one. The wounded cried through the nights, medics worked until their hands shook, and the smell of smoke and blood clung to everything like a second skin. Sophia moved among her comrades like a shadow, offering no words of comfort, for none came easily to her lips. They greeted her with respect now, but also with something else: distance. The same soldiers who once mocked her now stepped aside when she entered a room, their eyes lingering with unease. To them she was no longer a fellow soldier. She was the figure who had stood on the ridge, her rifle roaring judgment, her calm precision slicing through the chaos. They respected her, yes, but they also feared her. And fear built walls higher than any insult ever could. Sophia noticed it in small things. At meals, no one sat too close unless there were no other seats. In conversations, men lowered their voices when she walked by, as if speaking freely around her was somehow dangerous. She had been mocked as Sniper Queen before, but now the nickname had shifted into something heavier, like a title carved into stone. They no longer laughed when they said it, they whispered it as though speaking the name of a legend that might overhear. And though she had longed for recognition, she discovered that reverence was colder than ridicule. She found herself lonelier than ever. But there was no time to dwell on feelings. Scouts brought word of another enemy force moving through the northern passes. This one was larger, organized, and determined to reclaim the valley they had lost. Command ordered Sophia's unit to hold position until reinforcements could arrive from the south. That meant days, maybe weeks, of bracing against waves of attacks in a broken outpost with dwindling supplies. Everyone knew what it meant. To survive, every shot had to count. And once again all eyes turned to Sophia. She felt the weight settle on her shoulders like a mountain. She had not asked for the crown they had given her, but there was no taking it off now. When the attack came, it was different from before. The enemy had learned. They moved carefully, with discipline, spreading out in formations that denied her easy targets. They knew about the sniper in the mountains and used smoke screens to blur her vision, decoys to draw her fire. She adjusted quickly, her brain working like a machine, reading wind through the smallest shifts in dust, finding outlines in the fog. Every pull of the trigger was slower, more deliberate, each bullet carrying the burden of expectation. Her spotter, a young private assigned to assist her, whispered ranges and wind calls nervously, his voice trembling as though he stood beside death itself. She calmed him with nothing more than silence, her steady breathing the only answer he needed. Through the scope she found her rhythm again. She targeted radio men first, silencing the voices that held the enemies. Coordination together. Then she shifted to heavy weapons crews, her bullets piercing the helmets of those manning machine guns and rocket launchers. Each kill was precise, each one ripping a piece of momentum from the advancing force. Her unit below fought like wolves, emboldened by the thunder that cracked from her rifle above. They no longer shouted her name in mockery, nor whispered it in awe. Now they roared it in desperation, calling for their sniper queen as if invoking a talisman. To them, her presence was survival itself. Yet even as she fought, Sophia felt the strain. The distances were long, the shots grueling, and her body carried the bruises of countless recoils. The constant expectation pressed into her chest like a blade. She wondered how long she could keep this up. The men saw her as unshakable, but inside, she was fracturing, each battle carving away another piece of herself. Every face she dropped through her scope stayed with her, haunting her dreams. And yet she could not stop. To falter even once would mean watching her comrades die, watching the outpost burn. Her crown was forged in blood, and it bound her tighter than chains. The battle raged into night. Tracers streaked across the darkness like angry stars, explosions flashing against the cliffs. Sophia remained prone on the ridge, her cheek welded to the rifle, her eyes burning from strain. The private beside her had long stopped speaking, his voice gone hoarse from shouting adjustments. She worked on instinct now, her crosshairs flowing from one silhouette to the next, the rifle cracking in steady rhythm, the valley answering with screams. She felt more machine than human, her body acting without thought, her soul buried beneath the mechanics of war. By dawn the attack broke. The survivors scattered, leaving behind their dead, their weapons, their courage. The outpost still stood, battered but unbroken. When Sophia descended from the ridge, her uniform coated in dust, her rifle blackened from smoke, the men greeted her with silence. Some reached out to touch her shoulder as she passed, as if to confirm she was real, not some phantom that had haunted the battlefield. Their eyes carried both gratitude and something sharper, fear maybe, or awe so deep it felt like worship. She wanted to tell them she was just a soldier like them, that her hands shook when she cleaned her rifle, that her dreams were filled with the faces of the dead. But she said nothing. Legends did not speak of doubt, and that was what they saw when they looked at her now. Not Sophia the woman, not the girl who had learned to hunt with her father, but the sniper queen, cold, distant, untouchable. That night, she sat alone again on the ridge, staring at the stars. She felt the weight of the crown pressing heavier than ever, a crown forged not of gold but of steel, dust, and blood. She wondered how many more battles she could endure, how many more times she could prove herself worthy of the name they had given her. And though she longed for rest, for release, she knew the answer. As long as she could breathe, as long as her rifle could roar, the sniper queen would fight. Because in the silence of the mountains, with the ghosts of her shots echoing forever, there was no turning back. Sleep had become a luxury Sophia no longer remembered. Each night her eyes closed only to be assaulted by visions of bodies dropping through her scope, of faces frozen mid-breath as the bullet struck. Some nights she could still see the first commander she had killed at 3,000 meters. The image burned so deeply into her memory that it surfaced even when she was awake. Her hands trembled sometimes when she wasn't holding the rifle, but the moment her cheek touched the stock, the trembling ceased as though the weapon itself demanded stillness. The men around her continued to treat her like a myth, and with every battle the distance grew. They brought her extra rations, offered her the best cot, carried ammunition to her position, but not out of kindness. It was reverence, fear, and dependence all mixed into one. She was their lifeline, their shield, the living legend they whispered about when they thought she couldn't hear. And though she had proven herself over and over, Sophia began to feel like a prisoner in her own reputation. The next mission did not come as defense but as an order from higher command. The enemy had withdrawn deeper into the mountains, using hidden passes to ferry supplies and reinforcements. Reinforcements were still days away for Sophia's unit, but command wanted immediate disruption. Sniper team infiltration, the order read. Sophia and 2 spotters would infiltrate the high ridges, locate supply lines and eliminate key targets to slow the enemy. It was a mission designed for ghosts, and the men knew exactly who their ghost was. When her name was read aloud, no one was surprised. The spotters chosen were volunteers, eager yet terrified to stand beside her in the field. Sophia accepted silently. Orders were orders. Yet deep inside she knew the truth. This was no longer a soldier's duty. This was ritual. Every mission, every bullet, was another test of whether she could still wear the crown of Sniper Queen. The infiltration began at night. The mountains were unforgiving, jagged paths winding through sheer drops, the wind howling like a predator waiting for them to fall. Sophia moved with quiet precision, her rifle slung across her back, her eyes scanning shadows for movement. Her spotters struggled to keep up, their breaths ragged, boots scraping against loose rock. She offered no words of encouragement. This was not a place for words. Silence was survival. Hours passed as they climbed, until the ridge opened to a narrow overlook. Below, through the pale wash of moonlight, Sophia spotted it. A supply convoy winding along a hidden path, trucks loaded with crates, guarded by dozens of fighters armed to the teeth. She lay prone, scope pressed to her eye, studying the formation. Every instinct in her screamed that this was the kind of target that could shift the tide of war. If she broke them here, the enemy's strength would bleed out. But it was not an easy shot. The convoy was moving, the winds were vicious, and the range stretched nearly 2,000 meters across the ravine. Her spotter whispered wind calls, his voice trembling. Sophia blocked it out, trusting her own senses. She felt the air against her cheek, watched the dust trails twisting near the valley floor, measured the sway of trees against the cliffside. Her mind was a storm of calculations, her heart steady as stone. When she squeezed the trigger, the rifle cracked like thunder rolling across the peaks. The lead truck's driver slumped, the vehicle veering into the ravine, tumbling down into fire and twisted metal. Chaos erupted instantly. Fighters shouted, scrambling to cover, some returning fire blindly into the ridges. Sophia was already chambering the next round. Another shot, another driver down, another truck swerving into ruin. The convoy was trapped, pinned in the narrow valley, unable to advance or retreat. Her shots tore them apart, one by one, the spotters beside her whispering in disbelief as though they watched a story being written in front of their eyes. But this time the enemy reacted faster. Mortars launched again, shells whistling through the night, tearing into the cliffs around. Rock fragments slashed her arms, fire flared dangerously close. She rolled, repositioning, dragging the rifle with her as if it were her very soul. The spotters panicked, one nearly losing his grip on the ridge, but Sophia's voice cut through for the first time. "Stay down. Stay quiet." Her words were sharp, commanding, and they obeyed. She adjusted her scope again, ignoring the ringing in her ears, the dust burning her eyes. She fired once more. Another officer fell, his body twisting in the moonlight before vanishing into the shadows. The convoy was broken, supplies burning, the valley floor lit in chaos. When the last shot was fired and silence crept back into the mountains, Sophia lay still, chest heaving, sweat freezing on her skin. The spotters looked at her as though they had been walking beside something divine, their faces pale, their hands shaking. "We should move," one finally whispered, but even then he didn't move until she shifted first. They descended the ridge under cover of darkness, the enemy too shattered to pursue, the mountains once again holding their secrets. When they returned to the outpost with the report of the destroyed convoy, the men erupted in cheers, their voices raw with relief. "Sniper Queen strikes again," they shouted, no mockery in the words, only awe. But Sophia heard the chain in those cheers. Every victory bound her tighter to the role, every impossible shot pulled her further away from being human. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her cot, hearing again the sound of her rifle, feeling the ghosts of the fallen pressing closer. The crown weighed heavier, the chain tighter. She was no longer just Sophia. She was something else, something forged by bullets and fear. And she knew there was no going back. The Sniper Queen was not just a title now, it was a destiny, one written in the endless echo of gunfire, Sophia began to notice the change not only in her comrades but in herself. The first time she had ever pulled the trigger in combat, her stomach had clenched, her body trembling in the aftermath. Now, after dozens, perhaps hundreds of kills, she felt only silence after each shot. The recoil no longer jolted her, it grounded her. The sight of a body collapsing through her scope stirred no shock, no hesitation, only a cold acknowledgement that another target had been removed. The transformation frightened her in ways she could not admit aloud. She was becoming the thing her unit already believed she was. Not Sophia, the woman with a family and memories of childhood hunts, but the embodiment of a rifle, a tool of death wrapped in human form. And though she had once sworn to herself that proving them wrong was her only goal, she realized now that she had gone far beyond that. She had become indispensable, a weapon her unit could not imagine surviving without. Her commanders recognized it too. Reports of her 3,000-meter kill had circulated through the upper echelons like wildfire, passed from briefing to briefing, whispered in halls as though it were a tale from another age. She had become a story before she had even realized it, her name invoked not as a person but as a symbol of precision and dominance. Orders began to shift. Missions were drawn up with her in mind, strategies hinged upon the expectation that the Sniper Queen could achieve the impossible. It was both an honor and a burden. She understood the weight of being the keystone in the arch of every plan. If she faltered, everything would collapse. The next operation tested that weight. Intelligence revealed that the enemy had fortified a hidden command post deep in the cliffs, a cave system shielded by natural rock and heavy defenses. It coordinated attacks across 3 provinces, and eliminating it would sever the enemy's spine. But the position was unreachable by airstrike without risking civilian villages nearby, and assaulting it directly meant certain death. Command's solution was chillingly simple: we send the Sniper Queen. Sophia was to infiltrate the ridges overlooking the cave entrance, identify the commanders as they emerged, and eliminate them one by one. A mission that demanded patience beyond reason, endurance beyond strength. She listened to the order with her face unreadable, nodded once, and began preparing her rifle as though preparing herself. The infiltration stretched over 2 nights, her small team of spotters and scouts inching through treacherous paths, avoiding patrols, carrying supplies on their backs like mules. Sophia spoke little, conserving her energy, her focus already drifting toward the cave far ahead. By the time they reached position, they were exhausted, lips cracked from cold, bodies shaking from fatigue. Sophia, however, lay prone and silent, scope pressed to her eye as though she had only just begun. Through the magnification, the cave mouth revealed itself, shadows of guards pacing, the occasional officer stepping into the light to bark orders. It was a fortress hidden in plain sight. She waited, her finger never even brushing the trigger, watching, calculating. Hours bled into one another. Her spotters dozed in shifts, but Sophia remained awake, patient as the stone itself, her eye fixed on the cave. When the moment came, it was sudden. A group of officers emerged, maps in hand, gesturing toward the valley below. She recognized the insignia, the posture of authority. Without a sound, she exhaled, adjusted for wind, and squeezed the trigger. The first officer crumpled, the others scattering in panic. Before they could react, another shot echoed, dropping a second. The cave entrance exploded into chaos, guards shouting, returning fire into the ridges though they had no idea where death had come from. Sophia chambered another round, unblinking, the scope her entire world. One by one, commanders fell, each shot tearing the enemy structure apart. The guards tried to shield them, dragging the officers back into the cave, but Sophia anticipated every move, her bullets threading through gaps in defense with ruthless precision. Her spotters whispered in awe, their voices trembling as though they stood beside a god. But gods bleed too. The enemy unleashed heavy fire on the ridges, mortars and machine guns scouring the cliffs. Rock exploded around her, shards slicing her face and arms. One spotter was killed instantly, his body shredded by shrapnel. The other screamed in panic, but Sophia did not move. Her cheek stayed pressed to the stock, her fingers steady on the trigger. Her focus narrowed into something inhuman, each breath timed with the pull, each heartbeat aligned with the fall of another officer. Her mind felt both empty and sharp, as if she had abandoned herself and become only the rifle. When finally the cave entrance was littered with bodies and the surviving enemy leaders had fled deeper inside, she rolled onto her back, gasping for air, blood mixing with dust on her skin. The mission was declared a success. Her unit returned battered but triumphant, the command post crippled, the enemy's coordination shattered. Back at the outpost, the men celebrated with fire in their eyes, chanting her name, raising cups in her honor. Sniper Queen. Sniper Queen. The words echoed through the night like a battle hymn. Yet Sophia sat apart from them, silent, her rifle across her knees. She felt no triumph, only emptiness. The cheers rang hollow in her ears as if they belonged to another world. The crown they placed upon her grew heavier with every kill, every cheer, every whispered legend. She had won the battle, but she felt the weight of a war inside herself that she could never escape. And as dawn broke over the jagged peaks, painting the mountains in crimson light, Sophia whispered to herself words no one else could hear, "I am already gone." The Sniper Queen remained, but Sophia, the woman, the daughter, the soldier who once only wanted respect, was slipping further away into the shadows of the rifle's echo. Sophia's hands shook faintly as she cleaned her rifle after the night raid, though she would never allow anyone to notice. The shot that had ended the armored column had spread across the unit like wildfire, yet the triumph had left a deeper shadow inside her than the cheers could dispel. A part of her wondered if she had crossed an invisible line, if she was now defined entirely by the weapon she carried rather than the heart that once beat for duty and family. Every time someone slapped her on the back or called her Sniper Queen, she felt the compliment stab at her ribs, a reminder that she was no longer just Sophia. She was a title, an expectation, a myth wearing flesh. The others laughed, but she had begun to dream of her scope's reticle floating in front of her even with her eyes closed, an endless circle and cross that pulled her further from who she used to be. Her superiors didn't let the legend fade. Orders increasingly revolved around her skills, placing her at the core of operations that would have been inconceivable without her presence. While others rotated duties, Sophia was expected to be ready at every moment, her rifle zeroed, her instincts sharp, her endurance limitless. She became not just a soldier in the field but a weapon in the plans of men who never pulled a trigger themselves. The pressure was immense, but she never complained. Pride warred with fear inside her. Pride that she had risen above the mockery that once haunted her, fear that the line between Sophia the person and Sophia the rifle had already dissolved beyond recovery. The next mission confirmed her unease. Intelligence indicated that an enemy command cell had entrenched itself inside a fortified cave network high in the cliffs, directing raids across half the province. Airstrikes were impossible without endangering civilians in nearby villages, and a direct assault would bleed the battalion dry. In the briefing, the colonel's words had been cold and simple: "We'll use the Sniper Queen." The room had nodded as if the plan were inevitable, as if Sophia herself were no longer a choice but a tool. She said nothing, only met the colonel's eyes and accepted the assignment, though inside she felt an iron chain tightening around her chest. The approach to the target was grueling. Her small team trekked for 2 nights through jagged ravines, dragging packs heavy with ammunition, water, and camouflage netting. The air grew thinner as they climbed, and every step seemed to claw at their lungs. Some whispered jokes to lighten the march, but Sophia kept silent, conserving her strength, her eyes fixed on the distant peaks. By the time they reached the overlook above the caves, exhaustion bent every spine except hers. She settled prone among the rocks, the rifle steady against her shoulder, her scope already trained on the dark opening below. To her, fatigue was irrelevant. The mission was all that existed. For 2 endless days she lay hidden, waiting. Her spotters rotated in and out of shallow sleep, but Sophia refused to close her eyes. Through her scope, she catalogued every movement: guards pacing, couriers rushing in and out, the flicker of lanterns deep inside the cavern. She memorized patterns, breaths, the way the flags on their uniforms fluttered in the wind. Patience became her weapon. When the enemy commanders finally emerged into daylight to argue over maps, her world contracted to the delicate pressure of her finger. The shot cracked across the canyon, and the first officer collapsed before his words could finish. Chaos exploded at once. Soldiers scattered, shouts echoed, and rifles fired wildly toward the ridges. Sophia did not flinch. She cycled the bolt, exhaled, and fired again. A second officer fell, blood soaking the dust. Her spotters whispered in awe, as though they were watching something more than human. The enemy scrambled to shield their leaders, but Sophia anticipated every move, her bullets threading gaps with surgical precision. The cave mouth became a death trap, every attempt at retreat met with a flash of her barrel. Then the counterfire began. Mortars pounded the cliffs, sending shards of stone whipping through the air. One spotter screamed as shrapnel tore him apart, his body collapsing beside her. The other panicked, firing blindly down the slope. Still Sophia remained unmoved, her cheek pressed against the stock, her mind stripped down to breath, trigger, impact. Dust coated her lips, blood seeped from a cut above her brow, but her eye never left the scope. One by one, the enemy command disintegrated under her unerring fire. Only when the cave was littered with bodies and the survivors fled deeper inside did she finally lower the rifle. The silence that followed was heavier than the bombardment. Sophia rolled onto her back, staring at the wide sky, her lungs heaving. The cost of the mission lay beside her in the broken form of her comrade, but the radios soon buzzed with reports of victory. Command was ecstatic. The enemy's coordination had been crippled in a single night. Her name spread once more like thunder, and by the time she returned to camp, the men had prepared a celebration. Cups were raised, songs shouted, and again the chant roared into the night. Sniper Queen! Sniper Queen! Yet Sophia sat apart from the firelight, her rifle across her knees, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the perimeter. The chants no longer sounded like celebration to her ears but like the echo of chains. She thought of the officers she had killed, the friend she had lost on the ridge, and wondered whether there was anything left of Sophia beyond the legend. When dawn touched the horizon, she whispered into the silence, a vow to herself that none would hear, "I must remember who I am before I am gone completely." But even as she spoke the words, she feared it was already too late. Sophia's vow echoed in her head for days, but reality gave her no room to dwell on it. The unit barely had time to bury their dead and reorganize before new orders arrived. Enemy reinforcements were moving across the border, heavier armed and better trained, and the battalion was tasked with intercepting them. Once again, the plan revolved around her. Sophia would position herself along a ridge overlooking the valley and dismantle the command vehicles before the convoy could fan out. She listened to the colonel's briefing with a cold stillness, nodding at every point, though deep inside she wanted to scream. Every operation had become Sniper Queen first, the rest second. Still, she strapped on her gear, slung the rifle across her back and prepared to march. Duty was heavier than her doubts, and she carried both with the same grim silence. The trek to the valley was a march into fire. Scouts reported drones patrolling the skies and snipers already positioned along the slopes. It was a game of mirrors, two forces each hunting the other's eyes, trying to blind before being blinded. Sophia and her